So there's a word in this title that's going to cause some contention, and that word is surprising. Like fear or humor, we all have different thresholds and knowledge bases, so we're gonna find some different things surprising. Bearing that in mind, I'm Sasha Wood, and let's jump into the top 10 surprising superhero weaknesses. Let's start off gently at number 10 with Dr. Manhattan and Detachment. The Watchmen by Alan Moore, released in 1986 through 1987, is one of the defining graphic novels out there. A realistic story of pathos, loss, and despair. All of the superheroes are flawed, but Dr. Manhattan proves that a weakness can be a state of mind, and is perhaps only a weakness due to others' lack of ability to perceive it. After John Osterman is vaporized by an intrinsic field experiment, he reforms himself. However, in the process, he becomes something else entirely. A being of near godlike ability who exists outside of time, a state that gradually detaches him further and further from humanity as he slowly forgets what it feels like to be a part of it. This detachment eventually leads to him not being able to be a superhero at all, due to a complete sense of apathy and inability to relate. Killing without feeling and unable to connect to anything, John eventually leaves the Earth behind to explore the universe's possibilities, but states he may return. So if your powers get to a point where you exist beyond morality, well, that's definitely a weakness for a superhero. But for a cosmic being, well, that depends entirely upon your philosophy. Something that is definitely a weakness in at number 9, we have Heroine, used by Speedy, aka Roy Harper. Not all weaknesses are unrealistic or magical, and not all of them have to come from the outside or from villains. Heroes are just as human as everybody else, as proved in Green Lantern and Green Arrow number 5, when the Green Arrow learned that his ward/sidekick Speedy was on heroin. This team-up series was a 70s attempt to have superheroes tackle some hard-hitting real-world issues, some of which have aged better than others. One thing that stuck was Roy Harper's drug addiction, which was really introduced to prove a point to Green Arrow that not only poverty-stricken kids were drug addicts. So really it wasn't a decision that had to do with his character, but other writers took it and really used it to develop Roy. His struggles came to emphasize that being a sidekick came with its own pressures and pitfalls, and that not everyone could cope with the superhero lifestyle. Roy eventually recovered, but is still in danger of relapsing. His New 52 origin changed him to a recovering alcoholic, and his rebirth backstory is still developing. However, if used correctly, Roy can be an example of the real-life struggles some people have to go through every day. Which is not the case with our number 8. We have Superman and high sonar frequencies. Superman gets a bad rep as being overpowered and lacking in weaknesses, which makes his fights boring. But he actually has a fair few weaknesses, it's just writers rarely exploit them. Of course, kryptonite is so well known it has just become common parlance for any weakness. Another well-known one is red sun radiation, which basically weakens him down to a normal human level. But one not everyone thinks of is high frequencies, and it makes a lot of sense. Superman is Superman in many senses of the word. Keyword, senses. His are greatly enhanced, especially his hearing. He is able to pick up and distinguish individual heartbeats, so it shouldn't be surprising then that a high-pitched, well-directed noise blast pointed directly at him would prove crippling. Especially when you think about the fact that Jimmy Olsen's watch summons Superman by using a high-pitched frequency that blocks out all other noises briefly. This one is more of an extrapolation and less established firmly in lore, but really it sounds like a lot easier to build this kind of sonar machine than going on a quest for kryptonite, or trying to blot out the sun. But hey, you do you. Someone else who can't stand the noise is our number 7. Daredevil. Again, is this surprising? Well, it depends on the writer. Matt Murdock's second sight and how powerful it is really varies depending on who is writing him. Is he perfect and untouchable, or flawed and more human? Well, for one arc, the Daredevil's weakness was noise pollution, which for those not in the know is a harmful or annoying level of noise, such as from an airplane or industry. Now the thing with this one is that while the Daredevil has lived in a city pretty much his whole life, so the question is, does the noise pollution need to increase? Does it happen when he's in an unfamiliar area? How quickly can he adapt? Are his villains well enough aware of this to really use it against him? Based on how key hearing is to the Daredevil's ability to, well, see, this makes sense in theory, but in practice would need some pretty consistent rules to be an effective weakness. So I guess how rarely it is used or thought of could make it surprising. Up next at number 6, the Green Lantern's rings and the color yellow. So for a while, Green Lantern power rings were affected by the color yellow. This was for reasons that have changed over time. First, it was a design flaw, but it was later revealed to be because of an impurity within the central power battery. That was then said to be from the now fear entity and not just insane insane Hal Jordan, Parallax. However, this latest update also allowed for the ring bearers to be able to overcome this weakness, rendering it inert. Because, well, most people thought it was silly. And it was. However, it did give us some hilarious panels, like Hal knocking himself out on a yellow billboard, or getting knocked out by a yellow lamp, or more recently in the extremely poorly executed All-Star Batman and Robin having to fight Batman in an entirely yellow painted room, facing a Batman who is also painted yellow, who is drinking lemonade. Ridiculous and hilarious. Something equally funny, at least with the covers they made for it, is our number 5, Aquaman and dehydration. Aquaman has it rough. People make fun of him all the time, be it for his silly costume and lame powers, which is odd when you think about it. Most of the Earth is his domain, and he has some pretty intense telepathic abilities and great combat skills. Maybe now that he's being played by Jason Momoa, people will stop making fun of him. I know I don't want to fight Jason Momoa, but I will fight Silver Age Aquaman, because in the late 50s, Aquaman had to come into contact with water every hour or he would die. This was a retconned weakness because prior to that, Aquaman could exist indefinitely out of water, and he would be able to do so again in the following decades. But for one brief moment, if you could keep Aquaman in the desert long enough, you would be victorious. It's pretty inconvenient to have to ride around such a handicap, so I can see why this one didn't last. I mean, I guess he could have had a utility belt full of water bottles. Still, it is surprising that some small aspect of this didn't linger. However, who knows, maybe in the future some part of it will come back. It could work if the time frame is less restrictive. Moving on to number 4, Captain Marvel, now currently Shazam, and his weakness, saying his own name. Shazam has had a long, complicated legal history with comparisons to Superman and also who has the rights to the Captain Marvel name, a battle which he obviously lost. But his creator's inability to win a lawsuit isn't his only weakness. Young Billy Batson gained his powers from a wizard he met in the subway system so that he could fight humanity's 7 greatest enemies, which were ideas, not actual villains. Things like greed, sloth, and envy. He could access his powers by saying the word Shazam, also the name of the wizard who granted him said powers. Upon saying the magic word, the 10 to 12-year-old, it varied, would transform into the adult Captain Marvel, a superhero with super strength, flight, and a sense of moral duty. Whether or not he kept his childish mind has varied over time, but to turn back into Batson, he also had to yell Shazam. The only thing, the transformation involved him being hit by lightning. He has used this to his advantage by yelling Shazam then trying to get his opponents underneath the lightning. However, this also means that he can accidentally turn himself back into Billy Batson mid-fight, or other people can make that happen, as occurred in the memorable Justice League Unlimited episode, Clash, which was super awkward because no one knew that he was actually a child. Now there's another lawsuit waiting to happen, but Shazam would probably win that one. Still, having a magic word everyone knows is key to your transformation, probably not the best thing for a well-known superhero. Another superhero whose weakness is pretty well known is our number 3, the Martian Manhunter. The Martian Manhunter is terrifying. His array of powers are just astounding. He can shapeshift, phase, elongate. On top of all this, he's a powerful telepath. He can not only read minds, but also link non-telepaths up using his own telepathy. He can use mind control, astral projection, possession, so why would anyone ever dare go up against him? Well, thankfully, he does have some weaknesses. One key one, that being fire. This weakness has been part of his character for a long time, but it's really inconsistent how much it affects him and when. But currently the most accepted reasonings are that it is a crippling phobia developed after witnessing the death of his race. It was a fear placed there by the Guardians of the Universe in the Trial by Fire storyline, but since the New 52, it just seems to be PTSD. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter himself, feels it's a silly fear to have, and many readers seem to agree. But hey, PTSD is serious business, and your hero has to have a weakness, otherwise it's just not a fair fight. Being able to pick up your opponent's weakness at the gas station though, makes the fight seem a little bit more appealing, but it's still terrible odds. However, your odds get a lot better if you have the required materials to fight our number 2, the Green Lantern again. Yes, but not Hal Jordan, this time we have to go back to the first purple cape wearing Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Back in the 1940s, when Scott found a green meteor that told him how to construct a ring from its metal, Scott decided to fight crime, first seeking out the criminals who had caused a railway bridge to collapse where he worked. It was here he discovered this magical cosmic ring's one weakness: Wood. Ordinary wood. He learns this when he is bludgeoned with a club. His ring could also not affect wood, which in the 1940s would have been a pretty big hindrance. So remember, phenomenal cosmic power can be defeated by going to the hardware store and getting a 2x4. Look, it was the 40s, comics were being pushed out like crazy and the expectations were different. There wasn't always time or demand for some deep backstory as to why a weakness was what it was. Some heroes' first comics don't even have their origins in it. Still, in hindsight, this is pretty hilarious. Which brings us to number 1, Wonder Woman. Okay, before we get into it, this one takes some explaining and isn't in use anymore. However, it is very much of its time and it honestly still gets a bit of a bad rap. In the 1940s, when Wonder Woman was created, her weakness was specifically having her hands bound together by a man. Wonder Woman comics are notorious for the amount of bondage in these comics, particularly on the covers. Princess Diana is tied up left, right, and center. There were many reasons for this. One was to not scare off young male readers by making her appear too dominant. Another was that the creator believed that bondage was a healthy part of normal human relationships. As for this weakness, it's actually not as sexist as people think. The reason it was male specific was the symbolism. Wonder Woman explains that for an Amazon to permit herself to be chained by a man, she becomes as weak as any other woman in a man-ruled world. If you think about it, it's actually an extremely convoluted attempt to express why a woman should be careful about giving up her agency. It's simplistic and not as nuanced as it could be, but it has more reasoning behind it than a lot of comic book decisions being made at that time, like say, wood. In fact, the creator, William Moulton Marston, created her because he felt there was a void in comics for female superheroes. He wanted to make young girls feel good about being female. His attempts at Wonder Woman's character were based on trying to boost female self-esteem based on the understanding of gender norms of this time. He stated, and I quote, "Not even girls want to be girls so long as our feminine archetype lacks force, strength, and power. Not wanting to be girls, they don't want to be tender, submissive, peace-loving as good women are. Women's strong qualities have become despised because of their weakness. The obvious remedy is to create a feminine character with all of the strength of Superman, plus all of the allure of good and beautiful woman." Yeah, in hindsight, it's pretty silly for one of the strongest beings to be held in place by normal rope. So yes, his execution definitely needed a little work, but it has some solid reasoning behind it for the time. Still, for many, especially out of context, this is one surprising weakness. So there you have it. Were you surprised? If not, how about at least slightly taken aback? Which superhero weaknesses leave you scratching your head? Share your faves down below. I'm Sasha Wood, thanks so much for watching Top 10 Nerd. You can check me out on my channel, Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Leave all of your suggestions down below, and I'll see you soon.